Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish. We are back broadcasting live from the Yes Bar in Glasgow after a road trip to West Kilbride last week.
Sorry, we're a bit late. We're having some issues out with our control, so hopefully you're watching this live. Maybe you're not. If the issues defeat us, you'll be watching a recorded version of it, in which case apologies for that, but thanks for your patience.
Joining us for today's Full Scottish is Angela Crawley MP for Lanark and Hamilton East. She's the SNP spokesperson for Women and Equalities and a member of the House of Commons Committee for Women and Equalities. And
we're welcoming back James Dornan MSP for Glasgow Cathcart and journalists Kat Boyd and Kevin Mckenna, who are going to help us do the Full Scottish newspaper review this morning.
Today's music is from Christy Scott. She's a young singer-songwriter from the northeast coast of Scotland. She's currently studying music at the Royal Conservatoire.
And we're going to kick off the show with our newspaper review. And the front pages this week are a motley collection of stories, I guess.
They are quite broad this week. Today's Scotland on Sunday, Border Patrol and what will happen when Scotland becomes independent.
The Sunday Herald is Alex Salmond slapping down America over Trident cables, which we'll discuss later on.
Sunday Mail story, front page today, is about the tragic accident on the beach in Aberdeen.
The Sunday Post leads on that same story.
As does the Scottish Mail on Sunday.
And the Sunday Times is the Olympics, except I'll do it the right way up, which might be a bit easier. The glorious Golden Games, which attempts to link our Olympic success to Theresa May's plans for Brexit. How does it do that, you might wonder, but we're going to discuss that just now. So, Kat, Theresa May, Brexit, the Olympic Games, can you see any connection there?
I think that it's quite a bizarre, it's a bizarre piece, but also understandable is that this, whole idea of Brexit, is in Theresa May's eyes about, or maybe not Theresa May, but like it's certain parts of the Conservative Party is about, taking back control, making Britain strong again. And, the Olympics is, it's a very kind of British nationalist thing. So it's not a surprise when the British state is under so much pressure, essentially like certain pillars of it are being destroyed, that Theresa May is trying to latch on to this strong British identity that's, been fostered through the Olympic Games.
She's saying that, or somebody is saying, that they're going to channel the Olympic spirit when they're preparing their plans for Brexit. I'm not sure what that means. They're going to ask the athletes for their Kevin, can you see how that would work?
I can see a few outstanding links there. Because apparently a third of Team GB went to public fee-paying schools, and that's roughly about a third of the Conservative Party at Westminster.
Not the same third, though.
Well, they'll eventually become MPs, and you've got Theresa May saying, if I'm interpreting that correctly, she's saying she wants to channel the Olympic spirit and celebrate and support excellence, and I think she's referring to the International Olympic Committees, or rather, the Olympic Committee in the UK have decided that they will only support properly sports which they think will have a best chance of delivering a medal. It's very elitist, it's unashamedly elitist. They've got 20 key sports, and out of them you've got athletics, rowing and cycling. And it's possible, I think, to be cynical about this because, let's face it, the UK since 1896, which was the birth of the modern Olympics, have been waiting 100 odd years to find a sport that they excel in and that nobody else plays, in which case they can pick up gazillions of medals and be second, third or fourth on the table when it says, Great Britain recalls the days of empire when we were better than all those Johnny foreigners. So there's loads of ways for the Conservative Party to feed in that, because let's face it, that has been their raison d'etre since its inception. We are better than everybody else, support the strongest, withdraw support from the weakest, and ensure that our chaps in Oxford and Cambridge get a right good run at it, and then we can give them safe seats in Essex.
So cynical. Greg Clark, who is the Business and Energy Secretary, I'll quote what Greg is telling us. He vowed that the government would, quote, create an environment in which excellence can thrive. Kat, come on. There's nothing wrong with that.
know I'm a bit generally quite grumpy about the Olympics. I think Kevin makes a good point, because you're talking about the spirit of the Olympics. What actually are we talking about? Because if you look at what's happening in Rio outside of the Games itself, is you have massive mobilisations of anti-Olympic protesters. The Games itself, is not sustainable. It creates environmental chaos. There's land grabs associated with it, mass surveillance of civilians. Like, maybe that's right up Theresa May's street. So, she really is channeling that spirit. I mean, I can understand why she's saying it.
And when you consider the amount of money that's actually spent on the Olympics and training, I think the calculation is that each medal that we've won has cost us £5 million.
Well, it was 5.5 million at the middle of last week. We won a few more, so it's now down to about a more manageable 5 million, I think, per medal. And you've got, I mean, look, I was as charmed and enchanted as anybody else at seeing Nick Skelton, a 58-year-old who's broken his neck, had 2 hip replacements, jumping over fences with that big horse, flawlessly. And you're thinking, that's a bit of sacrifice, a bit of hard work, a bit of romance there. That's an individual story that we like. But the fact is that the Team GB celebrates elitism. Unashamedly, it goes for elitism. You will hear people say that as a result of these great role models like Skelton and Mo Farah and Jessica Ennis, that more people will take up sport, therefore cut down obesity, and we'll all be much healthier, and everything will be singing and dancing. But the fact is that there's a Scottish Homes survey done in association with UK Sport England, which has suggested, in fact more than suggested, that in the last few years adult participation in new sports has gone down. But that's not a surprise, given that all the money and the entire structure of UK athletics and UK sport at the top level is to support elitism, support only those who are good enough to reach for the stars and actually get it. School sport, grassroots sport, local club sport, we don't want to know you, and that is a perfect reflection of the way politics is done in this country.
But it's not a great leap to believe that if you have, for instance, Andy Murray doing amazing things in tennis, unbelievable things in tennis, then you will have more young people in Scotland thinking, I can do that, and therefore taking up tennis. And indeed we see a bit of a lift immediately after the Wimbledon, for instance, and I'm sure we'll see it after the Olympics. Doesn't seem to last. Or what is the problem there?
The problem is that the funding for these types of sports, cycling in particular, is geared towards the Olympics. Do you know what I mean? It's not about mass participation. It's not about investing locally or in grassroots, schemes to get young people involved in sport. Cycling is the prime example of it. That all the funding that they get is geared towards winning medals at the Olympic Games, and that's not going to be the reality for a lot of people. It is elitist. And there's all this talk about the Olympic legacy and so on and so forth. Well, look at what happened in Glasgow with the Commonwealth Games. You had people thrown out of their houses, their family homes. You had centres for adults with learning difficulties bulldozed to the ground to make way for a car park for the Chris Hoy Centre. There's no legacy there. There's no legacy for those working class people in those communities. It's all very well and good to talk about, it gets young people involved in sport. Well, does it? I don't think it does.
Let me be a devil's advocate in terms of the big sporting events, which will inevitably cost lots of money, millions and millions of pounds, but it gives us all great stories of the kind that you've just mentioned, and it also gives us something to aspire to, and part of human nature is wanting to join up with other people in common pursuit of something which binds humanity together. Isn't that worth millions of pounds?
Well, I was on a show this morning with one of your smaller rivals, BBC.
Yeah, are they still going?
Where Lee McConnell, who's one of our great athletes from Glasgow, who's competed in 3 Olympic Games, and she was very eloquent about how watching the 1992 Olympics in Barcelona had caused her, a girl who with no privilege in her background at all, to go to her mother and ask her to take her down to the local sports centre and start practicing. Now, that's great, but I would say that she was doing this in spite of the general approach of UK athletics and the people who look after UK sport, and I don't see any major benefit unless, you know, I may be proved wrong. If somebody from the IOC could say that by being second in the medals table and beating the Chinese into third will increase our chances of trading more, of selling more goods abroad, of employing more people as a result of these companies that do get advantages from that, getting more money to employ people, pay higher wages, fine. I doubt it though.
Let's move on to a related topic, which I guess is Scottish diet, our problem with obesity. But a cookery writer, Prue Leith, has suggested that one way to get around this is to make vegetables and fruit cheaper. Kat, do you think that is the problem, that vegetables and fruit are too expensive?
Well, I mean, I think it's a good story to say that these things should be made cheaper. I mean, I don't think it's the entire root of issues around diet. I mean, it's not. I also, find it difficult to simply talk about Scotland in this context. I think, it's not just a Scottish problem. This is happening all across the Western world, where people's diets are getting worse and worse. You look at the United States, where cases of childhood obesity have risen rapidly over the last 40 years. I mean, quite frighteningly so. And if people are priced out of buying healthy goods, then that's quite frankly appalling. But it doesn't, it's not just about the financial constraints that people are under. But I think it's a good idea.
So what is it about then? Because you can't say that it's not about education, Kevin, because everybody, it's better to eat a carrot than a cheeseburger.
Again, I'm a bit cynical about this because intermittently over the past 10 years or so, some of the bigger sponsors of our mass participation sports, football, rugby, and some of the partners of the Olympic teams have been McDonald's, other fast food enterprises, and they use this as a kind of fig leaf to show, we're not all about unhealthy food. We've got a responsible attitude. We might be selling hamburgers, but there's a bit of salad with them, and let's face it, we're asking people to participate in sport. Therefore, it might offset the unhealthy aspects of our food. And I'm also cynical because a lot of it, I think, it's not about cheap vegetables and fruit. It's about the opportunity for young people, children, to play, to have an active lifestyle. If children had the opportunity to participate in sport a lot more than they do in this generation, I suspect they could be eating hamburgers until the cows come home, or rather, till the cows don't come home. and they're not going to get any fatter because they've got an active lifestyle. But this then links into the elitist attitude of the the sporting authorities in the UK, where they're going for elite performers, and a lot of the money isn't going to mass participation at schools and local club levels. And I would like to see when the opportunities for children to take part in sport, when they actually started going down, and whether that also coincided with this, or began to coincide with this pursuit of absolute excellence at the very elite level of sport.
So at the same time as we're being told that we need to eat more greens and be healthier, one of TV's biggest shows is coming back on this week, the Great British Bake Off, where we're being inspired to make cake. But we can't have our cake and eat it.
Well, we can. I think the trouble is that we are having our cake and we're eating too much of it. It's amazing. That's an amazing phrase there. Yeah.
But what's interesting is Joanna Blythman commenting, the food critic, commenting that there should be a Great British Veg Off instead. I don't know that it would have the same appeal.
Carrot versus carrot cake.
Right, I'm not going to lie, I don't watch the Great British Bake Off thing.
Jeez.
But I think that it's creating a bit of a straw man, because actually a lot of the problems around food and diet is about processed foods, okay? And you're saying you're cynical, right? I don't think you can be a good socialist without being a bit cynical about things.
Right.
So I agree with you to a certain extent, but at the same time, I'm not entirely convinced, and there's lots of scientific evidence that says this is not it's not the 1970s anymore. The way that we consume food has changed, and to simply say that in order to be healthy, it's calorie in, calorie out, because it's not. It doesn't quite work like that. You know, eating a cheeseburger and then trying to run, 40 minutes on a treadmill to try and burn some of it off. It doesn't work like that, because the chemical content of processed foods is actually contributing to, health problems. And simply, just trying to then burn that off by being sporty doesn't work. It has a huge chemical impact on the way our body works. And this is all tied up with, particularly again in the United States, with the Food and Agriculture lobby, and ensuring that their business interests are protected. And kind of for me, it comes down to that. So I actually think the Great British Bake Off is fine, because here you've got people who are cooking from scratch. They're making things from scratch. Whether it's a cake, that's fine. But the labour that you put into making that cake, you're burning off energy. You're running about the kitchen, and you're making something with no chemical ingredients. And I think that's a healthy thing. Whether it's a cake or not.
All that energy you burn up, picking up the sugar to put into the cake mix.
I look at the sugar content of savoury foods as well.
That's true.
I mean,
talking about, you mentioned socialism. That's a segue maybe into Corbyn, I don't know. Anyway, Corbyn and Kezia Dugdale, Scottish Labour Party leader, is due to not back Corbyn but back his opponent Smith in the Labour leadership race. Kevin, Labour Party in Scotland, what's kind of... I mean, I don't know where Kezia Dugdale's been, actually.
Well,
she's been in some leadership training.
I'm glad that it's good to hear that Kezia's still with us and she's espoused an opinion, because I was wondering where she'd been. Because I think half the political classes and various advisors and politicians on some leadership course in the United States over the summer, weren't they?
Yeah, some leadership course.
Kezia got engaged as well,
which is nice.
Great. Mm-hmm. I think she's wrong to oppose Corbyn, and I think it's a symptom of the malaise and not just the Labour Party in Scotland, but the Labour Party of the UK, and it shows how out of touch with its ordinary members, its grassroots members, the Labour leadership is. When you talked about the Sunday Times there, there's a story in the Sunday Times that the Westminster Parliamentary Labour Party have come up with their own version of entryism within the Westminster group, where the anti-Corbynite faction at Westminster will vote as a pack, and they will squash or squeeze out Corbyn, will sit around him and oppose him at every turn, and that this is a preference. This is much more preferable than starting their own party. And in this being the Sunday Times, the words or the phrases hard left or far left are used 3 or 4 times in the first 4 paragraphs, and it talks about this group of MPs who oppose Jeremy Corbyn's hard left policies. Now, it's an 800-word article, and nowhere do you see an example of one of these so-called hard left policies. But then 4 pages later on, actually, lo and behold, there's another story that talks about a shadowy, because it's another word that's associated with the hard left. It can't be hard left unless it's shadowy. A shadowy hard left faction associated with Corbyn, of course.
Yes.
Is threatening general strike and basically crippling Britain and bringing it to its knees. And you think, well, there's a policy. That's a policy that they've associated with a hard left policy.
You need to be hard left to go on strike, or consider it even.
So that's well, most people are hard up.
Boom, boom.
So Kezia, yeah, of course, it's no surprise that she's back in Smith, but in my opinion, it's the wrong way to go.
You are talking at a conference held by the shadowy hard left momentum group. A decision which has attracted some ire on social media, I believe it would be accurate to say. Just why did you do that? Why did you agree to do that?
Why did I agree? Well, I think that there firstly are similarities between what Momentum is doing and that what I would consider a democratic awakening is engaging lots of young people. that's kind of reigniting a lot of, you know, feisty political spirit around Corbyn is quite similar in a way to, you know, the spirit of the independence referendum. And, you know, I'm an ally of Jeremy Corbyn's when it comes to socialism. Like, I'm an ally of, you know, the SNP when it comes to independence. But, you know, I go around the country, you know, speaking at meetings and things like that. And so often I meet people who say, I voted yes, but I really like what Jeremy Corbyn's got to say, but I can't join the Labour Party in Scotland. Do you know what I mean? It happens all the time. I think it's important that, you know, the kind of grassroots momentum and the grassroots of the pro-independence left in Scotland, you know, make connections. I mean, I'm not surprised that Kezia Dugdale's going to back Smith. I think that the Scottish Labour Party, you know, have far more in common with the PLP, and I think the pro-independence left in Scotland have far more in common with Jeremy Corbyn than Scottish Labour does, and it's creating this really interesting dynamic. I'm really looking forward to speaking at the event. You know,
what are you speaking about?
As far as I know, I think they're still like finalising the programme, but I've been asked to speak specifically about English democracy. You know, I think that, you know, I wrote it in my column last week, that I do think that for Corbyn, he has to take the question of democracy like far more seriously in terms of his policies. You know, and actually talk about proportional representation, scrapping the House of Lords and an English Parliament. And that's always, you know, as someone who's pro-independence, that's always been a big thing for me, saying, look, the people who get the worst deal out of the UK, you know, out of the nations in the UK, are the English working class. All they've got is Westminster. You know, at least in Scotland we've got a buffer. You know, Stortmont, even though it doesn't work properly, at least there's some kind of, you know, democratic engagement there. The Welsh have an assembly. If you're in England, all you've got is Westminster. And look at the backgrounds of these people in Westminster. It's completely unrepresentative. That's where, you know, monsters are being created, you know, in Nigel Farage and UKIP. And I think that it would be really good for Corbyn to take on that, you know, that idea of the need for English democracy.
Okay, away from the newspapers or the newspapers today, feature and review pages jammed full of reviews of events at the Edinburgh Festival. Greatest arts festival in the world. Kevin, you didn't like the Olympics, but come on, you're going to have to be thinking here that the Edinburgh Festival is just an amazing artistic event.
Look, Edinburgh is my favourite small town in Scotland. I've got a lot of time for it. It's a great week.
How come you make even that sound disparaging?
I worked in Edinburgh, as you well know, for 7 or 8 years with the Scotsman publications, and came to love that great.
And they came to love you too, Ken.
And its punters.
Indeed.
There's something about the festival that just leaves me a bit cold, because there's a contrived artificial aspect to it, especially in recent years. Edinburgh's trying too hard to present itself as this edgy, thoroughly modern, affluent, middle class, experimental city, because you've got television executives, television company directors, publishers, authors, successful authors trying to flog a few more books at overpriced events, which you can't get a ticket for anyway unless you order within the first 5 minutes, because they're held in tents that only host about 200 people. And if it's not that, it's dodgy Channel 4 comedians, again trying to launch a career or get a 6-month gig out of Channel 4. Whereas, and the government, what the government gave it £2.5 million last year, and Fiona Hislop was banging on about making Edinburgh a festival city, festivals every month of every year. But there's parts of Edinburgh which are as deprived as in the East End of Glasgow, and again, like the favelas, the people who live in the favelas in Brazil with their noses pressed up against the window of the opening ceremony. There's lots of people in Edinburgh who look at the Edinburgh Festival and go, it doesn't represent us. Why are they getting £2.5 million to present this? It's tickets that we wouldn't even think about, and we've got to use that tram system to get in. I think it's false.
You weren't a huge fan either.
This is what happens
Come
through
on.
getting me and Kevin on together. It's just like misery and stereo.
Somebody must have a good word to say about something.
No, like, there are things on.
Come on, the hoops.
There are things on at the festival this year that are really interesting, dynamic. I went to see something as part of the Edinburgh International Festival on Wednesday there. It was a concert by my favourite singer, Annie, which I've written about before. And you know, her album's all about state surveillance and drone war, and it's an incredible album. And I'm going to see this show, and I walk in faced with first line G4S security guards, second line G4S security guards. Very, very ironic.
Is she popular with G security
But this
guards?
is the thing, is like, you know, you have this corporatisation of the international festival, and then on the other side you've got the Fringe, which is genuinely quite exploitative, right? There's a lot of hidden costs for performers, you know, through promoters, through venues. Mentioned when we were chatting earlier that there's a really good blog called it's like basically a whistleblower of these types of venues that are exploitative, and you know, artists don't get paid for what is essentially their work. Now I think that has a very I mean, there's consequences to that type of environment, because it means that only certain people can afford to perform. And I mean, that's not across the board. I know that there are radical artists on at the festival this year, performing at the Fringe this year. But when you have people who are priced out of creating radical, taboo-breaking art, then what is supposed to be a vibrant festival becomes homogenised. Basically becomes, it's Tesco Festival, do you know what I mean? That people who want to create groundbreaking work often just can't take part in it. And I think that that's really worrying for the development of culture. I mean, I think that tackling that is more important than making Edinburgh a festival city, which is just not a sustainable way of developing culture or the economy.
Right, we don't have anybody on to argue the other case, so I will say, can't culture revitalise, regenerate cities? Well, clearly it did with Glasgow, has done with Glasgow. Edinburgh, what? You don't agree?
No, I agree with the principle.
Okay, so
Me too.
that's right. So you just agree with the principle, but you don't think it's applicable in Edinburgh?
I'm not. I mean, I'm not an expert, because it's not that I try to avoid Edinburgh at the festival. I try to avoid it. No, sorry, no, I don't. I love Edinburgh, but I don't go to all that many of these. I live in Glasgow. Glasgow is a 24-hour, 24/7 festival city, 12 months a year. Doesn't have to pretend it's something that it's not. Culture is something that's organic in Glasgow. It happens everywhere. A lot of it is free at the point of delivery. It goes on winter, summer, spring, autumn, and there's a lot of edgy, experimental companies, as well as the big, you know, Scottish Ballet and Scottish Opera. I guess I'm just cynical about the manipulative, exploitative, pretendy, artificial, shallow
Don't
aspect.
mince your words there.
I mean, I also, like, I think that I'm not just being miserable about it. Like, I think culture's a huge part of, you know, our day-to-day lives. You know, it should be free at the point of delivery, you know, as much as possible. But in the last couple of years, we've seen massive attacks on radical art. You know, look at the closure of the Arches, which was a proper space for artists to be able to, you know, experiment with great ideas, you know, put on incredible shows, attracted international attention, and has now been closed down. You know, and that was allowed to happen. And I think that that's a really worrying thing, that there's now no hub in Glasgow for, you know, groundbreaking artists. And the Edinburgh Festival and the Fringe is kind of symptomatic of this, because high overheads mean that people have to take lower creative risks. Do you know what I mean? So everything just ends up becoming this kind of like bland, you know, and it's not developing our cultural spirit.
Okay, that's a whole other show, not this one, but another one which we'll do maybe sometime next year, perhaps, when the Edinburgh Festival starts again. Right now, though, we're going to have some music from Christy Scott. Christy composes original folk songs and also, it says here, enjoys transforming songs by well-known folk artists. This is a traditional song you're going to sing today?
Yes, it's called Be Good to Me, and I learned it from my Scots singing teacher, Fiona Hunt. Be good to me as long as I'm here. I'll maybe win a while. He's bonny coming near the hill that'll take me free, oh yeah. For all that I and all that, and thrice's machalas all that. He's bonny coming near the hill that'll take me free, oh yeah. He wears a bonnet for a hat, a napkin for a cravat. He wears a jacket for a coat, and he'll be mine for all that. For all that I and all that, and thrice's machalas all that. He's coming here and he will be here to take me free, oh yeah. And maybe I'll hear hosen shoon while he mauna gang parfait. And maybe I'll gang neat and clean while you gang wet and troubled. For all that I and all that, and thrice's machalas all that. You'll maybe sit in my cartoon while I sit in my hall. There's none of you been good to me, yet I'll reward you, oh yet. You maybe need a bag of meal, for I will give you to all yet. For all that and all that, and thrice's machalas all that. I'll hae fine kilns and fine meal mills, and muckle mair than all that.
Thank you, Christy. Look forward to hearing some more from you later on. Yesterday, Full Scottish was at the Pride March in Glasgow. It was an amazing event. We've got interviews with the Greens co-convener Patrick Harvie, Angela Constance.
Angela Constance was there, Jamie Green, Crawley MSP.
Yep.
So here is a film we made at the event, and then after that we'll have a discussion about Pride and various other things with Angela Crawley and James Dornan. What is the purpose of events like this? What do you think they achieve?
Well, Glasgow Pride is a hugely important event. It's an opportunity to celebrate all the achievements of the LGBTI community in Scotland, but it's also an important point of reflection to shine a light on the progress that we still have to make in Scotland and of course elsewhere in the world to achieve true equality for everyone.
We have made huge steps forward in Scotland in recent years. What still has to be achieved, do you think?
Well, of course, Scotland is rightly recognised as a leader in LGBTI equality, but the Scottish Government is adamant there is no place for complacency, no place for conceit. So there's always more to do. So we want to update our gender recognition laws, for example. We want our legislation to be in line with best international practice. And we also want to be increasing the capacity and confidence of the education system to support all young people. It's very important that we hear the voices of young people within our schools, and if young people are saying that we've got more work to do to ensure that LGBTI young people feel supported and protected to achieve everything they can at school, we've got to listen to that, we've got to respond to that, and that's why we had some very important manifesto commitments about supporting the teaching workforce, but not just teachers, people who work with children, to ensure that they have the confidence and the capacity to support and promote equality issues, and to ensure, crucially, that first and foremost the needs of all our children and young people are met within our education system.
Great, thank you very much.
So why are we here today, Patrick?
Well, it's Pride. It's not exactly the sunniest, most blazing summer day for Pride, but it's fantastic to see so many people gathering here, not just for a good time, but for a clear opportunity to foreground the goals of the TIE campaign, Time for Inclusive Education. For a very long time now, we've had a really patchy approach to equality in schools, and we want to make sure that over the term of this next Parliament, we make sure that every school, large and small, urban and rural, denominational and non-denominational, fully supports our community's equality and human rights.
And do you think there's specific aims that you would like to see as a Scottish Green leader in the next term of the Scottish Parliament?
I think there's a whole host of different policy areas, from trans rights to the inclusive education campaign, but as well I think there's something really fundamental about a political landscape where still political parties can come here and make speeches, but then still select candidates for election to councils, to parliaments, who don't support our community's equality and human rights. We wouldn't say racism is a matter of a special vote of conscience. We should be saying exactly the same thing about homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. We should be making sure that equality means equality for everyone, and all political parties are going to be making clear that that's a requirement of all candidates. That's what I would like to see happen over the next few years in the Scottish Parliament.
What's your advice for people voting in the election for local council next year?
I think anyone who believes in equality has to ask all of their candidates from all parties, because remember, the local council election is a preference vote. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can vote for as many parties as you want, and you put them in order of preference. So don't vote for any party that doesn't fully commit all of its candidates to supporting equality. If we make sure that all parties live up to that, then we will have a whole local government landscape in Scotland that's committed to inclusive education.
Hi, my name is Jamie Green. I'm one of the MSPs for the West of Scotland. I'm one of the new intake of Conservative MSPs, and I'm one of the few openly gay MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. I'm here today to support Glasgow Pride. I felt it was really important, given that Glasgow is where I first was introduced to the gay scene, and it was my first experiences of coming out were in Glasgow many years ago. So I felt that I owed something back to the community to be here today and support them in the march.
Do you think that over the years that Scotland has become much more open to the issues of equality and how that's progressed over time?
I think Scotland has become a much more open country. Going back 20 years when I was 16 and contemplating coming out to my friends and family, I think the world was a very different place. It was very difficult to do so. There were small LGBT groups in colleges and universities, but really I wasn't sure where to turn to find support and help to do that. I think in Scotland today it is easier to be gay, but that doesn't mean that things are perfect. The reason we're still marching today is that there's still a lot of work to be done for LGBT rights and for the community. So Scotland has got better, and I think Scotland is an open and welcoming country, but I still think there are parts of Glasgow and indeed Scotland where you wouldn't feel comfortable holding your boyfriend or girlfriend's hand in the street.
And as a newly elected MSP, what would you like to see over the course of the next Parliament to improve the equality in Scotland?
As a new MSP, I think whilst previous parliaments have made tremendous efforts with legislation, inequality, with equal marriage and many other equal rights that LGBT people have in Scotland, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I think we can certainly look at transgender issues, which I think have been perhaps on the back burner in the last Parliament. So we have 5 years ahead of us to ensure that in 5 years' time, when when this session of Parliament is finished, that I feel that I've done my best to ensure that trans people have a voice in Scotland. And I also think the theme at the moment certainly seems to be looking at education and how we can ensure that it's okay to talk about being gay in schools and colleges, and that people from a young age are being taught acceptance and tolerance in society.
Welcome back, and welcome to the Full Scottish to Angela Crawley and James Dornan. Angela, Glasgow Pride is one of the biggest LGBTI festivals in Scotland, but there are many events happening all over the place throughout the year. Why are events like this so important?
So it's a really good question, because Pride for many people it's a celebration, it's a party, it's an excuse to go along and be with other people who identify as LGB or T, or non-binary for that matter. But for me, it's a political statement that people fought for my rights, the rights that I enjoy today, and I feel that we still have a tremendously long way to go to ensure that we have full equality. So I see it as my responsibility to keep that fight up, to keep making that political statement, because we have come a long way. We do have equal marriage, we do have more equality than some people who fought for these rights before me, but we have to keep going, and that's why I think Pride is so important.
We also spoke earlier about the inclusivity of events and the fact that events like this need to be more inclusive to a wider audience.
Absolutely. I mean, the month of July and August is normally Pride Month, Pride season, and countries across the world celebrate Pride. Some countries are ahead of the game, and it is an all-family, all-inclusive event where everyone is part of the community. Even if you're not LGB or T or I or Q, you are part of that community, because you accept that you are a human and they are a human, and we are all part of humanity, and we should celebrate diversity. I think we have a long way to go to keep that momentum up. I would like to see that in future, whether it's Edinburgh, Glasgow, London or elsewhere, the event is for everyone, that you bring along your friends, that you bring along your family, that you bring along your children, and you understand that we have come a long way, but we have still got quite a long way to go, and I really want us to celebrate our diversity, but also make it an inclusive event. Let's not be exclusive, it's for everyone, so let's celebrate that.
Although it's true that there's still a long way to go, sometimes it's good to look back and think of the distance that we've travelled. I mean, I remember, and James, you'll remember, Section 28 debate. I mean, the country that debated Section 28 is very different from the country that we currently live in.
Yes, to a great extent it doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. My brother's gay, and I can remember when he was a teenager that he didn't come out to us until he was about 18, but he knew from he was about 14 or maybe slightly earlier that he was gay, and it was a different world. It was not a world of you'd feel uncomfortable about holding your boyfriend's hand. It's a world where you would feel frightened to hold your boyfriend's hand, and that would be mainstream Glasgow and in many other cities through Scotland. So he had to move, first of all, down to London, and then eventually he's over in Portugal now, where he got married last year. Unfortunately, before the legislation came in where he could get married in Scotland, because I think ideally him and Will would have got married here, and I'd like to see that, but I had the pleasure to go over and see him. But the Section 28, I remember it vividly, and I remember the impact it had on my mother, because she used to come in and say to me, you know, you'd see these big signs on buses that would suggest that Michael was less than us, you know, and that's just unforgivable. I think we've come a huge way. We have come an absolute massive distance, but we are not anywhere near the end of it, and I agree with you in that what we have to do is, Pride is two things. It's about everybody getting together and celebrating who they are. It's also sending out the message to people who are not, who are heterosexual, that this is exactly the same, they're living exactly the same life as you, and they should be allowed to live exactly the same life as you. So I think it sends a very powerful signal out, and I'd have to say, as a partisan Glaswegian, I think Glasgow's is easily the best in Scotland and probably the best in the UK.
In terms of media world, and we've just done a newspaper review, I remember again, just harking back briefly to the Section 28 debate and the Daily Record, particularly being, I think its views expressed at that time were quite, actually from a different age, almost from a dinosaur age. It's almost impossible, Kevin, don't you think, for the Daily Record now to imagine the Daily Record or any paper voicing opinions as it voiced them during that debate?
I think even then, with the Daily Record, the views that it was espousing then probably weren't even worthy of the Daily Record at that time. There was a specific editor of the Daily Record at that time who almost made it a personal crusade about maintaining Section 28, and he took the whole paper with him. And I know for a fact that there were several journalists, more than several journalists, on the Daily Record at the time who were deeply uncomfortable then. And yeah, we are in a different country, and to be fair to the Daily Record, because there isn't anybody here who works for the Daily Record, they've brought, in fact, they've been supporting LGBTIQ rights.
Oh, no, absolutely. As I said, I mean, you couldn't imagine the Daily Record, the Daily Record as it is today,
I don't
being
think
that.
There's any paper who would, because I think Scotland has moved on from the language of discrimination, whether it be against LGBT people or other minorities. We're a more grown-up country. We're trying to be more enlightened. We've got equality laws. We're striving for equality of opportunity for everyone. And although, as James said, there is still a long way to go, I think Scotland, in some respects, without being complacent, has been a beacon with some of its legislation, some of its attitudes, and that has come from, you know, and I've been quite cynical about political leaderships over the years, but I think that we've taken, there's been a great example given by people in administration and power at Holyrood over equality and issues surrounding discrimination.
Angela, you were talking about what the things that we still have to do. Ty, one of the main partners in the event, its big issue is to have more education in schools about issues surrounding LGBT. And why is that important? Why is this education aspect of it? Why is that something that we should really concentrate on?
I think first of all, to say Time for Inclusive Education, what it's about is teaching young people that regardless of whether it's your mum, your dad, your aunt, your uncle, your brother, your sister, or yourself, if you identify as LGBT or LGBTI or Q or another gender for that matter, that your gender identity should not be rigid. We live in a society where social constructs and inequality is so ingrained in our consciousness that you can't actually say that young people today can make a fully informed choice. So if you wove into an education system within the curriculum the ability for young people to understand that diversity exists and that it's okay to be whoever you want to be, I think that's fundamentally important, and what TIE represents and what it stands for, I absolutely support. It's why I was happy to support them yesterday and to continue to support what Pride stands for. But as you were just talking about, yeah, it's not that long ago that to love the person that you love was illegal, and that, to my mind, is something that children need to understand. We teach them about civil rights, we teach them about the movement for black rights, we teach them that racism is bad, but we still live in a society today where it's okay to call someone a derogatory name because of their sexuality or their gender, but it's not okay to be racist. We need to find a parallel here, and I think that whether it's in Westminster talking about hate crimes, whether it's in the Scottish Government progressing forwards, I think that the Scottish Government is progressive, I think it is leading, but I think there is so much more that we can do. We are in government, we have an opportunity to continue to be progressive, and we have a responsibility to do that and do that effectively. So it's not about sound bites and it's not about platitudes and it's not about saying let's be the international best standard on trans, because we absolutely should be. We should be in line with Ireland, with Malta, with other countries who are ahead of us already. And I think Scotland is leading in that respect. It's in our manifesto. We have made a commitment so that if you are transgender, you're not going to be afraid to be who you are, to express who you are. You're not going to be another statistic of suicide. So we are ahead. We're ahead of Westminster. Westminster are still talking about it, but they're going nowhere. So I'm proud that in Scotland we're making that commitment, but we've got further to go.
Kat, when you were at school, when I was at school, it's so hard to remember, it's so long ago, but it would have been impossible to have a discussion about it as we're having just now. I mean, you couldn't have mentioned it in my class. I don't know what it was like when you were at school, and I don't know what it's like when you're at school just now, how open you can be.
Well, I think that this has been one of the big successes already of the TIE campaign, that it's highlighted the epidemic of bullying around like people being bullied for their sexuality or their gender identity. I mean, it is rife, and it is a crisis, and we should be treating it like a public health crisis. The statistics that Ty have put out about instances of suicide, attempted suicide, self-harm, depression, mental breakdown, I mean, these are children, they're young people, and I think that this is, when Ty have kind of exposed the reality of those statistics and led that campaign, that's actually been, a very important part of changing the conversation even now. So I think, we're talking about, the media and, maybe during Section 28 they took a position. I mean, and that's now no longer publicly acceptable, but I do still think that in a lot of media outlets there is latent homophobia, latent racism, latent sexism. The way that reporting is done is often still seen through those prisms, because there's an institutional problem that needs to be tackled. This is what Ty is doing. It's taking on the institution of education and trying to make sure that those public changes actually have an impact on pupils' lives.
James, your brothers, you talked about your brother's experience and your family's experience of that. I mean, just now, is he feeling more relaxed in Scotland, or?
Well, he stays in Portugal now, and he has for 42 years.
Right.
So that kind of shows you the impact that the early days had on him.
Yes.
His husband, he met his husband and moved over there a long time ago. But they contact me regularly, right, and say how pleased they are, and they have parties that show that, like the debate, the marriage debate, they had people round and they were showing it on the computer and stuff like that. And he says he was greeting because Scotland had become this country, which he didn't recognise from his youth. But he's back regularly and he sees a huge difference in Scotland. He sees a huge difference in the attitude of the people of Scotland. But I mean, as been said by the other speakers, there is clearly a long way to go. The Thai campaign has clearly raised the profile of issues that were out with the scope of what we would have been talking about earlier on. We'd have been talking about people being gay or bi, lesbian, gay or bi, but it's much more than that now, and that's really encouraging, because I do know of situations, I do know of cases where young kids are unsure about their sexuality and the pressure that they're put under, and the effect it's had on their life and the impact it's had on the way they treat themselves, never mind the way they treat others. So I'm hugely in favour of anything that can get that message out there and can help, so that these kids can go to others and know that they're going to get the support that they require.
Because the Thai campaign is a relatively recent campaign, and I think the people involved in it aren't seasoned campaigners, and yet it's achieved a huge amount already, and hopefully will go on to achieve a great deal more. So, and Pride continues today with various events throughout Glasgow. Now, we're going to move on to David Pratt, who is contributing foreign editor of the Sunday Herald, and a regular in this programme. Regular viewers will have seen him very often, and he is currently in Iraq on a field mission, and we talked to him yesterday, and here's what he had to say. Hopefully. David, thanks for joining us. You're in Iraq. Whereabouts are you, and what are you doing there?
Well, for the last 3 days, I've been on the sort of front-line areas of places called Gwer and Kazia. Now, these are two of the hottest sort of front lines in the campaign to retake Iraq's second largest city, which is Mosul. The Peshmerga, the Kurdish fighters, are moving through those front lines, attempting to push towards Mosul at the moment. So for the last 3 days, I've been with them on those front lines, which it means that they're actually engaging with Islamic State fighters at quite close quarters.
And what are you seeing there?
Well, I mean, if I can take, for example, today and the last days, I've been particularly at Gwer. This place called Gwer sits on the Grand River Tab, which is a sort of tributary of the Tigris River. Now, there's a massive traffic bridge that runs across it. It's been heavily destroyed. And on the far bank is Islamic State. On this side are the Peshmerga forces. Having said that, the Peshmerga have now pushed over to the other side. I was there earlier today, and the Islamic State fighters are still there. Now, obviously, they're well dug in, and there's exchanges of gunfire, mortar fire, Whenever the Islamic State fire mortars, the coalition airstrikes are called in and they're bombarded. There's also a big problem with snipers for the Peshmerga fighters. I mean, in the last week alone, there's been one Peshmerga killed, 5 of them over the last few days on that front line itself. The other thing that I've seen is that, the Islamic State are using lots of tunnels that they've dug over the last 2 years. So whenever you take surrounding villages, or villages are liberated by the Peshmerga, as you go through these bomb-damaged buildings, you come across what the Islamic State have left behind. Some of the clothing, some of the weaponry, ID cards, documents, and of course this labyrinth of tunnels that we use and are using across whole swathes of Iraq. It's really quite spooky actually moving through these buildings. And, there's often a horrendous smell because many of these positions have been hit by coalition airstrikes, and many of the Islamic State fighters, the dead Islamic State fighters, their bodies have been recovered from beneath the rubble. So it often can be quite awkward in terms of the smell.
How tactically important is this area?
It's massively important. I mean, Mosul is the second largest city. Just yesterday also, I interviewed Sirwan Barzani, who is not only the nephew of the president of Iraqi Kurdistan, he is also the commander-in-chief of the Peshmerga forces that are involved in this push through these 2 crucial frontline areas heading towards Mosul. Now, he told me he's optimistic that we can retake this second largest city in Iraq after Baghdad within 6 to 8 weeks. I have to say, from what you see on the ground, it's hard to imagine, given how slow progress is, that they would be able to do that. And he seems quite confident that it's possible. But these 2 front lines, indeed 3 of them, Guer, Hazir and Mahmoud, are all absolutely crucial places for the Peshmerga to move forward. Part of the problem is there are also Iraqi army forces involved in this campaign. And let's just say there's no love lost. Although they're ostensibly allies against the Islamic State, there's no love lost between the Kurdish Peshmerga and the Iraqi army. So coordinating this campaign to take Mosul will prove very difficult. And indeed, there's lots of concerns that if and when Mosul falls, the big problem then will be maybe another conflict between Baghdad and Erbil, between the Kurdish Peshmerga and indeed the Iraqi force.
There's been some unhappiness at the performance of the Iraqi forces. When you're there, are you seeing much to give you confidence that they're starting to fight more effectively?
Well, the area that I am in, Guer, is almost exclusively Peshmerga. I mean, 2 days ago I did see it was an Iraqi brigade that have moved up. And you do see Iraqi army troops, obviously. I mean, they're slightly different in terms of their appearance or equipment or whatever, and they do stand out separately from the Peshmerga. When we Mahmoud front line, there are many more Iraqi troops. So I don't really encounter them that much. I mean, it's mainly the Peshmerga, the Kurdish Peshmerga that I've been with. But when you talk to the Peshmerga, they're quite disparaging about the Iraqi army, who they say shall we say, slow in terms of their advance, they lack morale, commitment. Now, whether that's true or not remains to be seen, but certainly it's an indication of a sort of simmering resentment, shall we say, between what are ostensibly meant to be allied forces against Islamic State. I mean, in a way, it's only this common enemy, Islamic State, that is keeping this kind of coalition together at the moment. And obviously, when I say coalition, that includes, European and Western and American advisors on the ground, some of whom I've seen here. And obviously, it's very important in terms of coalition airstrikes, because without those airstrikes, it would be very, very difficult for the Kurdish forces to move forward. One of the biggest problems they're facing, and this was acknowledged by Sirwan Barzani when I spoke to him yesterday, is Islamic State's use of what's called VBIDs, To you now, that's a suicide truck bomb or a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. And basically, these are huge trucks packed with explosives, which Islamic State are using to try and stop the Peshmerga advance. There was one that was actually taken just 2 days ago, which had 10 tons of TNT on it. So you can imagine if that actually is rammed into some Peshmerga position, the kinds of damage that it would do. And these things can only be taken out with anti-tank weaponry, of which the Peshmerga have very, very little. And indeed, Barzani said to me that one of the things that we desperately need is more weapons of that kind from European and American sources. And some of that's already coming, but in his opinion, not enough. But these are the kind of tactics that IS are using: tunnels, suicide bombers, everything they can to try and stop the Peshmerga advance.
And what are conditions like for the Peshmerga forces?
Well, one of the biggest problems here right in the Brits, to be honest, is the temperature. I mean, there's lots of talk about this campaign gaining ground, and momentum as the weather begins to kind of cool slightly. I mean, over the last week, I gather in Glasgow you've had it somewhere in the region of about 24 degrees. The average temperature here is in the region of 45 degrees. This afternoon it was 48 degrees. It never drops below 50, 52 at night. So you can imagine that operating in that heat for these troops, it's all very well people who say, we live in this part of the world and they're used to it. People are not used to these temperatures. They're utterly abnormal. Soldiers to operate in terms of that heat is very, very difficult indeed. And getting supplies forward, particularly on the Guelph front, is incredibly difficult too, because there's this crucial bridge which has been blown up in 2 sections. One of those sections was repaired over the last 48 hours, and the Peshmerga began to move supplies across the river into the direct frontline area where they're combating IS. But there's another span of that bridge yet to be repaired, so they're trying to bypass it. So there's structural problems that they face, there's the heat that they face, there's the incredibly sort of unorthodox and ruthless tactics which IS use as well. It's going to be a tough slog. The ironic thing is, Mosul from these positions is only something in the region of about 50 kilometres away. I mean, you can come back from the front line here in 40 minutes to the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan, which is Erbil, which is, to you, the only normal functioning city. It's got shopping malls, it's got cinemas, everybody socialises, it's a normal city. 45 minutes to an hour down the road, you are on the front line facing Islamic State fighters, and it's utterly a dog-eat-dog and ruthless confrontation. So it's quite a surreal environment.
Are you getting any sense of what life has been like for people living under IS control?
Well, I mean, there's a number of camps around the Guer area, and from people that have fled. One of the main camps is in a place called Diabaga, which is filling up rapidly as more and more civilians flee those areas. On the other side of the Guer Bridge, where I was today, part of the problem there is that some of the villages, although they've been retaken by the Peshmerga, there's a predominantly Arab population there who've lived under IS, and some Peshmerga say that some of them are still quite sympathetic, so there's security concerns there. But the biggest problem of all, of course, is a humanitarian one. Tens of thousands of people heading towards Vietnam, something in the region of 100,000 over the last few weeks, with estimates going up to possibly 250,000 quite soon. And of course, you've got to remember that Mosul was home to over 2 million people, perhaps still 1 million remaining. So they're gearing up desperately for people coming out. Those that make it out talk of the conditions that they've lived under, and they're absolutely horrendous. You can imagine they're actually being held as human shields. These are places that are being bombarded, that are being fought over. There's very little food and running water or electricity. And the other problem, of course, is that that many of them are trapped in areas, and the Peshmerga are reluctant to actually shell areas in which the civilians do well, and now is used and sort of used to their advantage. So that's another way the Peshmerga face, is that they need to move forward. In order to move forward, we need to use heavy weapons, but these heavy weapons would take civilian casualties. Everyone expects those casualties to mount dramatically as they move into the heart of this huge city, which is Mosul.
Okay, David, thank you for joining us. We'll let you go there and get some sleep. You're coming back to Scotland next week, I believe?
All being well, Richard. Yes, I look forward to being back in the programme quite soon.
Okay, we hope to see you next week then. Hi. Right, that was David. He should be back next week. We look forward to coming to seeing him then, and we'll talk to him more about his experiences in Iraq then. Now we're moving on to the much long-awaited discussion, or long-awaited date for the independence referendum too. So Kevin, you wrote a column in the National earlier on this week where you urged Nicola Sturgeon to name the date. Why do you think it's so important to do that?
I think maybe it's because I'm a pessimist that I feel that there's a danger that the momentum that has been built up with the massive influx of new members into the SNP following not just the independence referendum but the Westminster election 2015. I'm not saying it could evaporate, but you wonder if there's a window of opportunity that will always stay open. You wonder if the whole concept of independence amongst especially young people, whether there's a possibility it might go out of fashion as we become much more interconnected in social media, the world becomes a smaller place. And you wonder as well if we will ever have a more propitious set of circumstances than we have at the moment if you're a pro-independence supporter such as me, in that you've got the withdrawal from Europe, overwhelmingly rejected in Scotland, backed in England. Not just the Brexit vote, but some of the unsavoury reasons for that, including immigration. And I could see that was, to my mind, that was a lot of people in England were hoodwinked by the extreme right of the Conservative Party. Not only that, but we've got, just a few weeks before that, the UK, Westminster, voted to spend £205 billion over the next 10 years or so on Trident. So we're, as a country, having this, that we are rejecting these weapons of mass destruction parked in our territory again. We have the differing attitudes to austerity, and we have with the obscenity of the Panama Papers, or rather the fact that the Panama Papers revealed the obscenity of mass tax avoidance, and also, let's face it, some tax evasion by very rich people, denuding poorer economies in their own countries, as well as our country, from much needed taxes. And this is money that these are people who, in a great part, were able to build their fortunes and their success.
So you've got all those things.
The UK.
I know you've got all those things leading to a climate where it would be advantageous to the arguments for independence. But Angela, the SNP it's a difficult balancing act, because you've got those things, but then you don't want to go too early. You don't want to lose.
And I think that's a really important point. I think with this debate, we are going through probably the biggest state of constitutional change, and that has been thrown into the mix as well with Brexit. And I think we have to be very careful that we are bringing people with us on the journey to independence, because my position remains unchanged. It doesn't matter how much or how long I am down in Westminster. I'm not fazed by that entire institution or what it does, because whether it's Syria, whether it's nuclear weapons, or whether it's allowing bankers and tax evaders to manipulate a system whilst we continue to be in austerity, Westminster is not working. So now we're in the most ludicrous position where we now have probably the most right-wing government since Thatcher, the most powerful right-wing government since the beginning of the European programme, and we are now sitting here with Brexit and a Prime Minister who has more power than any other Prime Minister has ever had for over 60 years. So timing is everything, but I want us to get this right, and I want us to bring people on the journey with us, and a lot of people need to continue to engage with that debate, and they need more time. So we need to be mindful that we can't put the cart before the horses with this one, and really listen to people, understand the reasons for voting no last time, and engage them in the process and let them understand what Westminster is and what it's doing for us, which right now is not a great deal.
How will you know, James, when the time is right? Or at least, what will you take into account to help you make that judgment?
There'll be lots of circumstances. Obviously, opinion polls are going to be one of them, but there'll be a whole judgment about some of the decisions that have been made in Westminster, the state of the Labour Party down in Westminster, you know, the likelihood of there ever being a change of government down in Westminster, but also every bit as importantly is how things are happening up here. You know, are people still confident that decisions that are made in Scotland will be for the benefit of Scotland? The Brexit thing, I don't think, I mean, I agree with almost everything that Kevin said, except for the need for Nicola to call a date. Because I think that once we do that, before we're prepared, before we're ready, following on from what Angela said about being able to take people with us, being sure, because let's be fair here, we have one chance. If we get this wrong this time, it will be a long time before we have an independence
James,
referendum again.
do you think we'll reach a point where we can never be 100% sure?
No.
Because a lot of the narrative in the last year or so, certainly since the independence referendum, was about sources within the party saying that there would have to be a series of polls showing consistent 60%. That's not going to happen.
No,
I'd be quite happy getting into an independence referendum in 50 or 51 because we went into the last one on 33.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that this is the point, is that we can't, I think it's really dangerous to just trail the polls. I mean, support for Scottish independence has always been about, what, 25 to 30%, you know, and it was the grassroots momentum, it was the plurality of voices that ensured that ended up at 45%. So I think trailing opinion polls, rather than trying to like set opinion, is quite a difficult thing to do.
To be fair, which is not what I said. Right.
No.
What I said.
No, I know.
Yes, I said that one of, yeah, exactly. One of that's what I said.
That's what I'm disagreeing with.
Yeah. Well, no, it has to be part of it, because if what we see is opinion polls saying that support for independence is 25% again, then there's no way in the world we're going to go for it. But what we have to do is we have to, and that's about the timing.
That.
So what we have to do is we have to be able to take a base and build on it. And I agree that we do not wait for a year of 60%. When the time looks right, when decisions about Brexit, right, when the Article 50 is eventually announced, which might be, I might be retired, and my grandkids might be retired by the time she gets round to, by the time she gets round to doing it, then I think things will start to spark from there, because just now it looks like the European question has almost been put to the side a wee bit, and I think that once the Article 50 is announced, then
Angela, you wanted to come in.
On that point, I mean, I as much as I would love when we gain independence for it to be a 60% plus vote, personally for me, a majority is 50% plus one.
Absolutely.
So if Brexit can happen with what was the slightest of majorities, then independence can happen on the same terms. I would love for it to be 60+%. I hope that that's where the movement takes us to. I hope that that's where we get to. But if I win, or not me personally, but if we win this with 50% plus one and I'm out of a job in Westminster, then that suits me and that's what we signed up to.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, like, with radical independence, like, we've already, like, tried to put in place, you know, a series of events, like, based in local communities, which is about making the case. Again, do you know what I mean? Obviously, the Summer of Independence didn't happen. I can't see it happening, like, now, considering it's
going to be a late Summer of Independence, seemingly.
Well, basically in radical independence, we're going to do what we did before, go out and like make those arguments at a local level and try and convince people of the case, and I think that that's the way it's going to be won at the end, not just by radical independence but by all those different campaign groups. My big worry is that the longer it is left, the more the SNP will be, you know, in power at Holyrood, at Westminster, or like, you know, dominate our seats at Westminster. You know, that there's another financial crisis on the horizon, you know, the possibility of damage to Scotland from that, the SNP being tied up in perhaps having to implement some type of austerity in the face of financial crisis, damages the case for independence. Because we're still in a situation where independence is synonymous with the SNP. And I think that's quite a dangerous position to be in, and I think that the sooner that we that we have a date for a second referendum, the better. the better it is for the case itself.
The case for independence is synonymous with the SNP because the SNP's been fighting for independence for 80 years. But the fact is that the independence referendum was that plurality of voices and will continue to be so. The SNP can't win it on their own and have no intentions of winning on their own. And that is what the summer of independence was about. Brexit has kind of knocked that in the head a bit. I suspect that we're going to go into a late summer of campaigning this, but we campaign on it all the time. I mean, when we're talking to anybody about next year's council elections, about the Holyrood elections before, about the Westminster elections the year before, we are talking about independence all the time. It's the party's raison d'etre, that and the good governance of the country while we're in power. So I do think that we will continue to fight it. We should not be rushing into making a decision about the date. We have to take a judgment on when the time is right and then announce it at that point.
Well, all that might be true. There was announced at the SNP conference this push for independence, which, for various quite obvious reasons, one of them being Brexit, that has been delayed. But there was a need to do something then, and that need still exists. There's a meeting in September, I think, of all SNP parliamentarians. Some newspapers, I think, in the Herald, particularly last week, suggested that independence would be very high up the agenda of that meeting. I guess, what would you expect? You would expect that to be the case. But there's an expectation. People are waiting for something to happen, I think it's fair to say, Angela. Will that meeting in September, is it liable to come up with anything concrete?
I genuinely don't know, in all honesty, what the meeting of September will be. I don't know the content, I've not seen the agenda. What I can say is that I think we've got to be mindful that no matter how much I might fundamentally believe that Scotland should be an independent country, there is a section of Scotland right now that does not necessarily believe that to be the case, and we have to understand where they are coming from. We have to engage with that, and we have to understand their reasoning. The other factor that we hadn't anticipated 2 years ago is the fact that we are now dealing with Brexit, and come November, when the next wave of recession happens as a byproduct of Brexit, people are going to start to feel that. That's going to impact on some of the pieces of work that each of the movements within the collective of independence are trying to get to, and we're going to have to work around that. That's logistics that we didn't have to deal with in 2014. So I think we have to really be careful that the point you're making is independence the top of the priority. It's never not been on the SNP's priority list, but we are also in government and we have a job to do in government. And going back to earlier, whether it's pride, whether it's inclusive education, whether it's dealing with the demographic of Scotland, whether it's dealing with health inequalities, whether it's dealing with inequalities full stop, we have a lot of work to do in government as well, and we need to get that balance right to restore some faith in the people who aren't quite there with us yet and believing that we should have all of the powers that come with independence.
What are you picking up, Kat, about, I suppose, the wider movement? And it's not just, as you say, it's not just about the SNP. I think there's an element of itchy feet among certain sections of it, quite rightly, in many ways. So, but can they not do something on their own?
Well, yes, and I think that a lot of groups are doing something on their own, like I explained with radical independence. Like, I know I'm a brat and I'm a bit impatient about these things, and I do want to see independence happen. It's not the entire crux on which my politics functions. And I agree with what Angela's saying, is like there are things that you have to do right now in order to improve people's material circumstances in Scotland, before you can take everyone on a journey towards independence. I mean, you have to have like a social democratic consensus, rebuilding a safety net as much as possible before you can ask people to take a risk on independence. Do you know what I mean? I think that part of the problem last time round is that we didn't talk enough about the risks of staying in the UK. I mean, we're now seeing what I would consider, Britain's finished. I think that what is happening right now with the pillars of Britishness, whether that's the NHS or Social Security or the Labour Party or like trade union rights, all of these things are fundamentally under attack and collapsing. And I think that's got to be a key part of the argument, is that we can no longer stay. Do you know what I mean? I think Brexit proves that as well. We can no longer stay in this situation. That's the kind of stuff that we'll be talking about in Rick, obviously with our kind of internationalist perspective.
And yet, and I hate to go back to opinion polls, but we'll go back to James and your reference to opinion polls. The most recent opinion polls suggest that the rise in support for independence that followed Brexit, or vote for Brexit, has evaporated.
No, the last I saw was we're still round about where we were just after the Brexit vote. But as I say that, well, I just said earlier on, I feel like the European agenda has almost slipped to the side a bit.
Okay.
And I think that once the impact comes in September, and once the Article 50 is announced, then that you'll see people start to fear about the impact of the no vote, of the yes vote, sorry, for Brexit, and therefore then the support for independence will start to rise again. But it's not just about that, it is about all the other things, about trying to make sure. There's a lot of talk about the powers we are getting next year after, that they still leave an awful lot of power in the hands of Westminster. You know, I think we're getting something like 17% of welfare, and you know, this is nothing. We're only touching the tip of the iceberg here. And we have to make sure that people are aware that we can't change everything without the full powers of independence. So I think that once we start to get those messages out, and once people start to see what the impact of Brexit will be, then I think that the support for independence will start to rise again.
Kevin, when you wrote that article, did you have a date in mind?
Tomorrow.
Yes, you did.
So this is August 2016. I suppose I'm thinking at the outside spring of 2018. James mentioned triggers for Article 50. But there was an article this morning in one of the right-wing papers saying that civil servants, even the most optimistic predictions among civil servants in England who are working on this, is 5 years. There was another story last week, again in one of these papers, who have got good sources within the government, the UK government, that it might never happen.
I thought it had to
too
be
complicated.
I thought once you trigger Article 50,
It's 2 years.
it's 2 years, not
And
5
and
years.
it's right what Kevin's saying, is that they're saying that they won't even trigger it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the problem with that, right, is that if that happens, the Tory party will completely explode or implode, because there's people just now, I think, that are giving Theresa May the benefit of the doubt. But if there isn't something happen, say, by the end of January, I think that she will have a huge group of rebels to deal with over this.
Which
'cause it hasn't-
again,
the issue hasn't gone
I
away.
mean, look, I'm not an absolute, I'm not militant about an early referendum. It's my preference. There is, I suspect, an opposite case, which I think James was espousing there, that you can await and see or seek this implosion of the Conservative Party if it doesn't happen, or it's watered down. I'm talking about Article 50.
Yeah.
And
I'm not really
that's a
saying
good-
that we wait, I'm saying that we don't tie ourselves to date just now. The earlier the better for me, but let's make sure.
Well,
that we do it
let's
with
look at
appropriate-
the SNP's autumn conference in Glasgow. When Nicola Sturgeon takes to the stage, that will be more than 2 years after the end of the independence referendum in Glasgow, one of the 4 areas that voted, the local authority areas that voted yes, and probably the vast majority of people in that audience will have been new members. Okay, maybe not the vast majority. A lot of them will be the new members. The expectations amongst those members were that there would be another independence referendum quite soon, not kind of in the distant future. And first of all, Nicola Sturgeon has to talk about independence in the here and now this time. No, none of this, well, you know, it's a distinct possibility, or it's highly likely, which she said immediately after Brexit. It has to be more solid than that. If she doesn't actually name a date, it has to be within either the what's left of this Westminster Parliament. It has to be either within that, or at the end of that, this will be part of our manifesto for the next one. There has to be.
Having said that, there's a whole media out there that is just longing for the chance to jump on and say, see, it's all been about referendum, it's all been about independence anyway, and everything else has been a farce.
An SNP government, and I'm not a supporter of the SNP as a political party, but this government could find a cure for cancer, and there would be sections of the media that would still say, it's all about independence. Will you lot? I would just, that will always happen. That will always happen.
Right, thank you very much, everybody, for that discussion and the show. It was very good. Thank you to all the guests. very good discussion, very interesting. And Michelle, what have we got to end the show?
We've got Christy Scott coming back on again. Christy's going to sing us another song as we play out. Thank you for joining us this week. Apologies again for any issues that affected your watching of the show. Remember to tweet us at Broadcast Scott and check us out on Facebook too, and we will see you again next week.
For a special show, hopefully.
Yes. Christy.
Oh, there are sober men in plenty, and drunkards barely 20. There are men of over 90 that have never yet kissed a gal. So give me a rambling rover, for York needing to Dover, and we'll roam the country over, and together we'll face the world. I have roamed through all the nations, taken delight in all creations, and enjoyed a wee sensation when the company did prove kind. And when parting was no pleasure, I've drunk another measure to the good friends that we treasure, for they're always in our minds. Oh, there are sober men in plenty, and drunkards barely 20. There are men of over 90 that have never yet kissed a girl. So give me a rambling rover, for York needing to Dover, and we'll roam the country over, and together we'll face the world. Oh, there's many that feel enjoyment for this merciless employment. Their ambition was this deployment from the minute they left the school. So they save and scrape and ponder, while the rest go out and squander. See the world and roam and wander, and they're happier as a rule. Oh, there are sober men in plenty, and drunkards barely 20. There are men of over 90 that have never yet kissed a girl. So give me a rambling rover, for York needing to Dover, and we'll roam the country over, and together we'll face the world. If you're bent with arthritis, your bowels has got colitis, you've got cabin bronchitis, and you're thinking it's time you died. If you've been a man of action, but you're lying there in traction, you will get some satisfaction thinking, Jesus, at least I tried. Oh, there's sober men in plenty, and drunkards barely 20. There are men of over 90 that have never yet kissed a girl. So give me a rambling